And just to give you some idea of the bigger scale, and a rather good illustration of Hunter's way of portraying it. Major artists were involved. Cousins was involved. His main artist was Jan van Riemsdyk, a Dutch artist, a Flemish artist rather, who worked in Britain and became a specialist anatomical illustrator working for John Hunter and William Hunter. Man of enormous skill. And this is the era where you begin to get professional illustrators. You begin to get people who dedicate their lives to being illustrators for a particular field, a new profession. And Jan van Riemsdyk was very good and manages to get the sense of the skin, the fat, the shine, all taking Bidloo's portrait thing a bit further. And Hunter wrote very well about anatomical illustration, saying that one is a portrait, that's where I got that word from, and the other is a generalization of the number of dissections. Being a Baconian empiricist, even if it had disadvantages, he would say this is the real thing. It's a kind of heroic enterprise in that particular way. This brings me on to my next category, which is superfluously real. And you could say there's a lot of superfluous stuff here in terms of the gravid uterus and understanding birth. And this is absolutely not a midwife's book. It takes two people to bring it up from the basement of the well cup. So it's certainly not a roving midwife's portable handbook. There's a lot that seems gratuitous and superfluous, but it's a question of gratuitous, superfluous to what? The whole book works in a certain kind of way. It's a visual product in relation to its patrons, in relation to its message. So the superfluity, all this gratuitous fat and so on, does actually perform a sort of function, but obviously not a central function in terms of childbirth. Superfluously real. I'm going to look at botany in this case and make a point just when starting out that botany, you've got exactly the same kind of issues of trust. The mandragora plant, the plant that's supposed to have its roots in the form of a homunculus, a human figure. A variety here. Abraham Boss, the teacher of perspective at the French Academy in the 17th century on the left. Very convincing, isn't it? Really pretty nice. Homuncular rather than homunculus, I think, in this case. But done with enormous conviction. And who is to say the root didn't look like this? We've all seen parsnips and potatoes that look like things. And the Wellcome Institute actually has some mandragora roots which have been subtly enhanced by carving that look very like people. On the top right is Mattioli, the great botanist, and Jacopo Ligozzi, perhaps a spectacular illustration. Painter of, I think, rather boring frescoes, but an absolutely wonderful natural history artist. His images of natural history in the Uffizi are one of the great treasures, one of the great masterpieces of natural history. And clearly, Ligozzi has no particular truck, as does Mattioli, with the idea that the mandragora and its properties somehow related to having the roots in the form of a human body. The botanical illustration, it's easy to tell it in terms of progress. What we have here is an anonymous, early printed herbal on the left, and Otto Grunfeld's on the right, Hans Weiditz, going from the Jura orbit. Two images of ivy. I'm sorry, the one on the left on the right is not terribly good. But botanical histories tell this in terms of progress, and it's more naturalistic, isn't it? You've got roots and you've got leaves which look convincing. But which one is of more use? If you're interested in simples, you're interested in herbs, this is in a herbal. The very simple illustration is actually rather good in some ways. It tells you ivy has a 3-part leaf pattern, and it has an alternating arrangement of leaves on either side of the stalk. And you find it quite difficult to get that information from from the Otto Brunfeld's book, it's much more convincing in a way. You think, yes, that's a real plant, but functional context and convention are very important in these things. And it's interesting that Conrad Fuchs, in his great botanical book, strikes a compromise between these. This is again Brunfeld's on the left. Lots of convincing details, but is it characteristic of the Narcissus family that they have leaves which crumple over in that way? It's obviously a silly thing to ask, but it is askable. But on the right, Fuchs strikes a nice compromise between a fresh, convincing, naturalistic image and giving information about the identity of the plant, which you can carry on. And identifying plants is a key thing if you're a doctor. If you're using herbal remedies, you don't want the wrong plant. And interestingly, it relates back to my early career as a botanist. One of the few books I retained is Nelderis and Bangert, a handbook of British flowering plants, 1955. I didn't buy it in 1955, I used to buy it. And that's part of a dichotomous key, which tells you about leaf shape. Once you've identified the leaf shape, you go on to the next doubt of identification. And of course, Linnaeus used the sexual parts of plant stamens. You could do diagrams of stamens to do this kind of identification. So in an odd way, the very primitive herbal is relating more closely than perhaps Otto Brunfeld's is to the modern botanical, not illustration, but it serves a particular function. And I can make this point perhaps most vividly and rather comically in relation to signs outside men's and women's toilets. This is in the Mori Museum in Japan, and I have to say that photographing signs outside men's and women's toilets is not very good for your reputation. The keys are absolutely fascinating. I might write an article on this at some point on the range of them, or if some student wants to pick it up as a visual semiotic project. This is the Mori Museum in Japan. Minimal and very much Japanese, the stereotype. I don't think anybody has any particular problem in thinking it's the woman on the right and the man on the woman on the left and the man on the right. But it's functional in context, isn't it? One of the points I'm making, particularly in relation to those botanical illustrations, is you can have a minimal illustration with no superfluity down to absolute basics, but it needs context. If you don't have the context, if you're not in the Mori Museum in Japan looking for the toilet, you're not going to make much of one of those images in isolation. This is a London restaurant. What happens if the man wants to perform an act which involves sitting down? But equally you can tell one's a man and a woman because according to nice gender stereotyping, the man is very angular and the woman is soft and rounded. It's amazing what you can get with these minimal images. So naturalism or levels of naturalism, and there is a resemblance here, isn't there? There's a minimum resemblance. There's a head in something else, something longer. And it's amazing how far in a context we can strip these things down. So is this naturalistic? Well, it's not naturalistic, but it has elements of resemblance and matching in it. It matches within a particular framework. I think it's covered with a light links to absorbent quality. And the final one is the matching, the real, which of course is very richer in tone. The two heroes of this particular enterprise are the Hunter brothers again, William and John Hunter. Both who used studs. Used studs because he painted good pictures, but they used them functionally in a particular kind of way. In London there was a rhinoceros. There's a rather good book by Clark on rhinoceroses which chronicled all the appearances of these beasts in Europe. This is in 1790. It was shown as a male unicorn by Mr. Clark, shown at the Royal Exchange in 1790, and Hunter dispatched